Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Global Pages, your home for world events, deep analysis, and the stories behind the headlines. I'm glad you're here because this week's Global Recap covers something extraordinary, a moment when politics, war, and strategy collide in ways that could reshape the future of Europe. Now, full credit to Philip Ingram from Times Radio Frontline. Many of the insights you'll hear today are based on his latest weekly analysis and the conversations he highlighted with Maxim Tucker of The Times, Robert Fox of The Evening Standard, and former UK Defence Attaché John Foreman. Their expertise gives us a window into what's really happening in the war between Russia and Ukraine, far beyond the surface headlines. So let's get into it. This past week, former US President Donald Trump made headlines once again, this time by talking about supplying Tomahawk cruise missiles to Ukraine. Now, if that sounds like a game changer, that's because it is. The Tomahawk is one of America's most advanced precision weapons. It's stealthy, accurate, and incredibly versatile. To give you an idea of how accurate it is, military engineers often say, you can choose which window you want it to fly through. That's how pinpoint its targeting can be. If Ukraine were ever to receive those missiles, or even the promise of them, it would send a thunderous message to Moscow. Politically, it would tell the Kremlin that the United States is no longer holding back. Militarily, it would allow Ukraine to hit Russian command centers, ammunition depots, or key bridges with devastating accuracy. And psychologically, it would rattle Russia's military command at the highest levels. Suddenly, targets deep inside occupied territory would no longer be safe. Trump also said something else, that the war should never have started and that bad judgment was used by both sides. That's a politically careful statement, but the human cost he mentioned is staggering. He claimed that in just 1 week, over 7,000 soldiers were killed between both armies, 7,000 lives gone in 7 days. Every week in this war, those numbers stay heartbreakingly high. And yet, the fighting goes on. Meanwhile, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has been calling attention to something most people overlook, Russia's shadow fleet. These are tankers that operate under fake identities, hiding ownership through shell companies to move Russian oil around the world, despite sanctions. But this shadow fleet isn't just about oil. According to Zelensky and multiple European security services, it's also tied to grey zone operations. That murky area of warfare that falls short of open combat but still causes real damage. Think sabotage, think cyber attacks, think underwater cable interference. Russia has been accused of testing the defences of Europe in all sorts of ways, launching small drone operations over countries like Germany, Denmark and Sweden, probing energy grids, and even mapping out undersea internet cables. These aren't random provocations, they're data-gathering missions. A way to see how fast Europe reacts, where the vulnerabilities lie, and how much chaos can be created without sparking a full-scale NATO response. That's modern hybrid warfare. You destabilize your opponents not with one big strike, but with 1,000 small cuts. Now, shifting to the front lines, journalist Maxim Tucker of The Times gave a powerful account of what's happening on the ground in eastern Ukraine. He described the fighting around the Donbas as some of the fiercest since the start of the war. He told one story that captures the entire spirit of Ukrainian resistance, the story of a young reconnaissance soldier named Rus. Rus is in his 20s, part of an elite Ukrainian recon unit. He and 5 other men were ordered to defend 2 small footbridges in a village near Guerilla. Tiny pieces of land, but vital to stopping a Russian advance. They were told they'd be there for 2 weeks. They ended up staying for 50 days. Each day, they endured shelling, drones, and the constant threat of being surrounded. On the 4th day, the Russians came. Rus and his team lay hidden, their commanders watching from overhead drones. They waited until the enemy was just 30 meters away, close enough to see their faces, before opening fire. The ambush was devastating. Russian troops panicked, some detonating grenades rather than be captured. Others were hit by Ukrainian drones, and despite repeated attempts, 8 assaults in total, the Russians never took those bridges. It's a reminder that even in an era of drones and satellite warfare, one determined soldier can still change the course of a battle. But even with these small victories, the wider front remains largely a stalemate. The Russians push, the Ukrainians push back, and both sides bleed heavily for ground measured in meters. In some sectors, the lines haven't moved for months. Still, there's a sense, subtle but growing, that Ukraine may be preparing for a larger move, perhaps a new counter-offensive before winter. Russia's forces are stretched, exhausted, and running out of men and supplies. Whether Ukraine can capitalize on that remains to be seen. Now, to another fascinating analysis. This one from veteran journalist Robert Fox of the Evening Standard. Robert explained how Ukraine has changed the algebra of warfare. While Russia relies on brute force and long-range bombardments, Ukraine is using precision strikes, technology, and creativity. Instead of hitting deep into Russia, Kyiv often focuses on shallow strikes just across the border, hitting fuel depots, electricity substations, or rail lines in regions like Belgorod. It's not about total destruction. It's about disruption. Shut down a rail junction for a few hours, and Russian logistics grind to a halt. He also pointed out something that rarely gets coverage: guerrilla activity inside Russia itself. There are growing reports of fires, explosions, and drone attacks deep within Russian territory, even thousands of kilometers away in Tatarstan, where major drone factories operate. Many analysts now believe these are carried out by pro-Ukrainian Russian partisans. People inside Russia who oppose Putin's war and are fighting back from within. If that's true, it means the conflict has crossed a new threshold. Russia is no longer just the aggressor, it's also becoming a battlefield. Fox also warned of a looming internal crisis for Moscow: food and fuel. While the harvests are mostly complete, diesel shortages are starting to hit farmers and industries. If that spreads, it could hurt not just the army, but ordinary Russians, eroding the public patience that Putin desperately needs to maintain. Then we come to John Foreman, the former UK defence attaché to Moscow. His words were stark: Russia has experienced a strategic catastrophe. After nearly 3 years of fighting, Russia has failed in its main objectives. It didn't topple the Zelensky government. It didn't stop NATO expansion. In fact, NATO is larger now, with Finland and Sweden both joining, and it hasn't broken Western unity. Foreman said that Putin's only remaining strategy is to outlast Western political will, to divide Europe, to make ordinary citizens in the West question why their governments are still supporting Ukraine. Because Ukraine's survival depends on money and weapons, roughly $50 billion a year plus consistent military supplies. If that support weakens, Ukraine will be in trouble. But if it holds steady, Putin faces a serious crisis within the next 18 months. Foreman also mentioned something many had forgotten: the failed Trump-Putin meeting in Alaska. It was meant to be a diplomatic breakthrough, an 11th-hour attempt to negotiate peace. Instead, it ended in silence. Even Russian officials later admitted it was a waste of time. Putin walked away confident, and Trump left frustrated. The symbolism of that meeting tells a larger story. Diplomacy is frozen, trust is gone, and the path to peace feels more distant than ever. So where does that leave us? In truth, we're watching one of the most complex conflicts of the modern era, a war fought on land, online, in the skies, and in people's minds. Russia, despite all its propaganda, has already lost strategically. It failed to break Ukraine, and it failed to stop NATO. But it hasn't been defeated militarily, and that means the war grinds on, fueled by pride, politics, and survival. Ukraine, meanwhile, continues to fight with ingenuity and resilience. Its soldiers, like Russ and his tiny bridge-holding unit, embody the spirit of a nation refusing to surrender. As for the rest of us, we're witnessing a test of endurance. Not just military endurance, but moral endurance. Can the world keep supporting Ukraine long enough for democracy to prevail, or will fatigue, misinformation, and political division hand Putin the victory he couldn't earn on the battlefield? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: this war has already reshaped the global order. Energy markets, food supplies, defense alliances, they're all shifting because of it. And as we move into another winter of conflict, the stakes couldn't be higher. That's your global recap for this week. If you'd like to dive deeper, I highly recommend watching the original analyses by Philip Ingram on Times Radio Frontline, along with interviews from the Times and the Evening Standard. Here on Global Pages, we'll keep bringing you the stories that matter, the untold details behind world events, explained clearly and honestly. If you found this video informative, please take a second to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. It really helps us grow and reach more people who care about understanding what's happening beyond the headlines.